Everyone. I'd like to introduce Andy Domeyer. Andy is the Director of Technology Operations at SPS Commerce in Minneapolis. He was one of the organizers of DevOpsDays Minneapolis and has been with SPS Commerce as employee number 82 in 2005, all the way to their current size of over 750 employees today. Andy is going to talk to us about how an organization's priorities need to be aligned across the entire company, not just within devs and ops. So thanks so much, Andy.
Thanks. Just real quick, can you guys hear me at all on this thing? No? All right. All right, we'll set that aside. Cool. Well, I kind of doing two computers here so I can see notes here. You guys are so picky, you want to hear. How's that? Is that better? A little bit, maybe? All right, I'll try to talk really loud too. I heard it's not super easy to hear him back. So if you guys can't hear me, just shout at me and I'll start talking louder. It's a good thing we're running behind because I actually am not really sure how long this talk is going to take. So I can talk really fast or really slow depending on how things are going or how bored you look. What I wanted to talk about today was talking about how I think priorities have become a really important aspect of whether you're a small company or a large company, and not so much how we're solving that problem, but more importantly, are we acknowledging that problem and what are we doing to help manage that? So understanding things like how empathy plays a role in this and how team size can impact how you need to think about how you're managing these problems. But ultimately, like I talked about before, your badges all say participant. So this conference is all about you guys. I'm going to be asking you guys a few questions. I might even make you raise your hands if you're not too tired to do that this morning. And by all means, please jump in if you guys have questions along the way, or even if you think you have an interesting point you'd want to throw out there. I'd love to hear it, because I think this is an interesting topic that can go a lot of different ways. So, intro again. Hi, I'm Andy. As Shannon mentioned, I've been with SPS Commerce since 2005, and it's been a really interesting ride for me. So we were around 80 employees when I started. We're at about 750 now. So I feel like I've had this unique opportunity to see companies function at different sizes, and it's been a very interesting ride for me. But I am on Twitter, AJ Domi. I promise that maybe occasionally I'll say something that's somewhat interesting. I tend to be optimistic by nature. I like to think the disk is always half empty. I like slides with pictures, and I don't like formatting my slides, so hopefully you guys, my slides don't drive you bananas. And I like DevOpsDays organizers. Let's give it a round of applause for these organizers. We would not be here without you guys. I know it's a ton of work. It's a ton of work, but it's awesome. We're all here today. And I don't like having to follow Bridget. I specifically asked not to follow you, Bridget, and they put me here anyway. So, all right. So the first thing I wanted to do is I just wanted to level set on what's the goal, right? When you guys go to work every day, what are you going to work for? What's your goal at the beginning of the day? And I asked Tom and Bridget ahead of time if I could pick on them. So I do want to pick on you, Bridget. When you get back to work after your conference tour that you're going on right now, whether that's Thursday or Friday, what's your goal that day? What are you going to do the day you get back to work? So Bridget's going to set up chef. Tom, are you here somewhere as well? Tom Duffield? Tom, what are you going to do? All right, so Tom's basically working through a backlog of issues, and Bridget has a big chef project. Oh. All right, so Bridget's changing her answer because Tom gave a better one. You were the one that cheated in your tests in high school. Let's keep their answers in mind a bit as we go through these next couple slides here. But Fred Kaufman gave a talk, and I really just love this talk. I listen to it probably every 3 months or so, and I'll reference it a few times through this conversation. But basically his talk is about what is your job? Like what is your job really? And he uses the analogy of a soccer team and how the goal of every soccer player on a soccer team is to win the game, right? You may be a defensive player, you may be an offensive player, but the team goal is logically superior to any goal of any individual. And so how does that apply to our goal in the workplace? What is our goal? So what I like to think our goal is that we want to be awesome, right? We want to deliver awesome service. Is there anyone in here that would argue with the point of saying that when you go to work, your company's goal is to deliver an awesome service? Does anyone disagree with that? So ultimately, if we go back to what Tom and Bridget are talking about, if they're really good employees or if they've got a really good team structure, the things that they're working on are contributing to that goal, right? They're trying to help the company win. They're trying to become awesome or deliver an awesome service. So the question I have for everybody, though, whether it's Tom and Bridget and how they know what to do when they get back to work, or any of you here, is who sets your priorities? How do you know what to work on? What are you going to work on next? How does that align with being awesome? There's a lot that goes into making that happen, and it comes from a lot of different people. Startups are always so interesting to follow, and you tend to be jealous of, holy cow, everything just seems so fluid, and everyone gets to just do awesome things all the time, and then you kind of overlook how much work it is to be, a 4-person team trying to deliver all that, and then you look at large companies that have to do this with the various silos and having the goats that can figure out how to make all the silos talk and all the other animals that Bridget was talking about. I think an interesting analogy to this too is if you think about like a football game. There's coaches for offense, there's coaches for defense, there's even specific role coaches like quarterback coaches. And the idea is that the coaching staff is a leadership team all working to deliver or implement a winning strategy. They want to win the game, right? So I think it's an important question that we all ask ourselves on a regular basis is, do you feel like your leadership is aligned that way? Are you in leadership, or does the leadership that you're working with function in a way that you feel like, yeah, this is my offensive coordinator and I feel really good about the strategy and how it's going to help us win the game? Or certainly we all have days where this is how we feel our priorities get set, right? It's an angry mob, it's pitchforks, it's torches, and everybody has those days. It's not, it's hopefully they're few and far between. I love the fact that you can see the Duff beer bottles in the background there. I think it's my favorite part of that slide. But we obviously have those days too, and so there's a balance, right? You want to make sure that you're going to expect these days, but you have to really think about, on a day where it's going to be somewhat normal, what does that look like for you? How do you know what you're going to work on, and how does that contribute to the overall goal? So I wanted to do just a really quick exercise and figure out a little bit. It's DevOps Day Chicago. It's the first DevOps Days. Let's talk a little bit about who's here. So really quickly, just want to see a show of hands. How many developers are in the room today? For those of you watching, there's like 2. No, I'm just kidding. There's a lot. There's actually I think this is way more developers than we had at DevOps Minneapolis. It looked like almost half the room. How many ops folks are here? Raise your hands. Okay, we may have to do numbers because it's possible the developers are outnumbering ops. Just looking at this, which is really, really impressive. It's awesome. Anyone from security here? We do have 1, 2. I didn't know if you guys would even be willing to raise your hands or not. I think that's awesome though. If you guys haven't watched Ben Hughes' talk from DevOps Days Minneapolis, you totally should. A security guy from Etsy who came and talked about how security should get more involved in this community and talk a bit more about it. How about QA? Any QA folks? A couple. Awesome. 2, 3, 4. How about anyone from marketing or product management? Got a handful. Okay. What's that? How about management? Nice. That's awesome. Nice work, guys. I'm there too. So real quickly, I want to pick on a few folks, and you guys actually have the opportunity to make my talk completely awful or really good. So I'm kind of putting my faith in your hands here. Somebody in one of the front rows here, was there a developer over here somewhere? Anyone? Can I pick on you? So just to pick on you, when you're going back to work or just in a standard day, how's your work organized? Who's setting your priorities? How do you know what to work on?
I'm actually the wrong person.
Why is that? When you did previous job.
So mostly it was Scrum backwards.
Okay, so morning Scrum conversations. Okay, so was that group a mix of marketing and developers, or was it primarily leadership and technology? Okay, so technology leadership in that developer example. How about somebody in ops over here? Anyone willing to help answer that question for me? Who sets your priorities?
Yeah, Remember used to work in the same team as I'm in now, so
Okay,
it's the same thing.
all right.
Infrastructure guys together, we work together every day.
Okay, and you set those in the Scrum and go from there. All right. How about anyone in the back? Operations engineer back there. How do you get your priorities set on a week or in a given day? On the Scrum board as well. Awesome. Okay. Security. This is kind of fun. How do you go about your day? How do you know what you're going to work on when you get back to work? How does that align with what the company's delivering? Okay. Oh, awesome. Security with a Scrum board. That is really cool. So Scrum is sounding pretty popular. How about marketing or product folks? How do you guys decide where your resources get spent in a given day? I know there are a few of you in here. Meetings. What? Just basically anyone that schedules it for you, or are you driving those? Okay. So one of the things that I think is interesting, the more I talk about this concept, or the more people I talk to about this concept, I start to hear a lot of different answers. Scrum seems to be certainly one of the more common ones that I have been hearing, but in a lot of operations departments, I hear pretty typically that they're working with their IT managers, and their schedules of their organization is based off patching schedules and maintenance, and then if development needs something for provisioning, or if there's a sprint coming up where they have dependencies, they'll work through that. And then from a security perspective, I've never heard of anyone using Kanban or Scrum. I think that's awesome. But ultimately, I think what happens as a company gets bigger is you start to struggle with who actually owns service delivery. So whether it's the technology managers helping set that in Scrum, or in the security Scrum, depending on who's establishing what those priorities are, or if you're in product and marketing and you're just getting pulled into every meeting that gets put on your calendar for 10 hours a day. Ultimately, how does that align with a goal? Like, is it really clear about overall how are you going to be awesome that day? And I think that when we get into this situation where we aren't necessarily in alignment as far as organizationally, do your priorities align with ops? Do QA's priorities align with development or with product or with security? We end up with products that look like this. That computer's not hooked up. So thinking about who owns service delivery, we end up with products that look like this. I think this is just a fantastic analogy, and you're going to see this picture a couple times through this talk, but just to help me out here, a show of hands, can anyone take this picture as an analogy and apply it to a piece of technology or service or infrastructure that's being ran in your environment today? You know, it's something that, yeah, it needed to get done, but there were some things in the way, but we did it anyway because we needed to get the service out the door and meet these deadlines, and it's there now, but we'll go repaint it later when the hay gets moved, I promise. This happens every day in a lot of different workplaces, and I think there's a really good question around this. Like, who's at fault? Like, keeping this example in mind, like, who's at fault here, right? Who should somebody have gotten out of the truck? Should the road have been cleaned ahead of time? So what I want to talk about is a couple of the perspectives that I have on this problem, and things that I just think people should take home or be aware of as you guys go back to your workplace Thursday and Friday or next week. So firstly is, what are we doing to manage this problem? This idea that, you know, I've got priorities, you've got priorities, my leadership, your leadership may be aligned, they may not be. I want to make sure I understand what I'm doing that's going to help us deliver an awesome service. And I think it's really important to acknowledge the idea that this is a problem that you manage. It's not a problem you solve. I don't think that I've ever seen an example, or it would be really hard to justify or prove to me that this is a problem that somebody solved, because the company is going to change. You're going to add new team members to your team. Your team's going to get bigger. Your team could get smaller. And so you really have to approach this as a problem that you're going to manage. And the good news is that everybody has this problem. So this isn't a problem that you just have in your company, it's a problem all companies have. And I think that's what starts to separate really good companies from companies that aren't all that great to work for or don't deliver great service, is that some companies manage this problem better than others. And as a result, they're more awesome. So the first concept that I want to talk about just briefly is priority transparency. At SPS, it's been an interesting watching us grow from a team where everybody just kind of knew what everything was going on to a team where you don't like to use the term silos, but where you start to have larger teams with more specific focus so that they can execute more effectively. And it starts to become hard to understand or figure out what is everybody working on right now, and does that apply to me? How does that apply to me? How can I help? So a question I wanted to ask the folks today is, are there people in the room right now that there's a dependency on you right now? You know it's somebody else's number one problem, but it's not your number one. Raise your hand if you're in that situation. So about a third of the room, not quite. This is a really interesting thing to think about. So somebody else at your organization has something that they need to execute on. Ideally, it's for something that makes you more awesome. And they can't do it because it's not number one on your plate as well. And I'm not arguing that your priorities might be wrong. But it's important to stop and ask yourself, do they see that? Do they know what your number one is, since your number one isn't theirs? And that's something that helps you manage this situation more effectively. So it's, going back to like when Bridget was talking about her tickets, and she'd get tickets done and customers might have been happy, but maybe not. It's the same concept. So you've got a queue, you've got a lot of important work to do, and so does everybody else, but they can help and they can understand what's going on if they know that they're not your number one. So I think the soccer example is an interesting one too, where when do you stay back on defense and when do you go forward? What's going to help the team the best? Sometimes you have to make those decisions and understand what the goal is and how you're going to prioritize the 6 things you need to get done, and is this a number one for somebody else, and how do I help them out? So priority conflict happens every day. Whether, I think really basic examples are product features. Are you going to deploy this build? Sorry if you guys are still really hurt over Heartbleed, but I'm sure there are companies out there that had feature releases planned for that day, communicated to customers, and people had to make tough decisions on whether or not they were going to push forward with those things. Or product management and development, figuring out, are we going to go spend our resources building this new feature that we think is going to make our company awesome, or are we going to fix this bug that is impacting a fourth of our customer base? What's more valuable to spend our time on? And these are conflicts that are going to come up every day that you just have to manage. I think shared infrastructure is always an interesting topic because unless you're 100% cloud, you have SANs, right? You have servers, you have infrastructure, and you need to decide what you're going to do to maintain and manage those. And a lot of times those same resources are the ones trying to deploy new code or trying to provision new infrastructure for development or anyone else. And then as well, slide got a little goofy here, but provisioning is an interesting one too. How many folks here, because of the speed at which it was needed, hacked together provisioning a node as opposed to taking the extra time it would take to automate it to go forward? Let's just get it out the door. They need it right now, right? So keep your hands up, keep your hands up. How many of you have gone back to automate that since? Half have gone back to automate, which is about right. So we deal with these conflicts every day, and I would argue that sometimes it doesn't make sense to go back and automate that now, or ever potentially. But those are decisions you guys make every day. So it sounds like a lot of folks in here are at a company that's using Agile development practices. Can I just see a show of hands? Whose companies use Agile today? Like 3/4 or so, and the other ones that didn't raise their hands are sleeping anyway, so we'll just say 100% are using Agile. I think one of my favorite tools or patterns that I see right now is that ops teams are starting to get more involved in the Agile process. Not so much from a, hey, this is my sprint and I'm going to deliver these things in these next 2 weeks with you, but more along the lines of transparency. Like we had so many examples this morning, it kind of blew me away that you guys were all participating in the scrums and talking about what was happening, what happened yesterday, what are we going to deliver today. Those are really interesting opportunities where I think a lot of times operations fails to make transparent what they're working on. And this is an awesome opportunity to be collaborative. If development wants to collaborate with operations, or if security wants to get more involved in the development process, talking about what you're doing right now is a great forum to start that conversation. Because if, going back to the scenario where somebody's number one isn't your number one, if you're in a scrum talking about what you're working on that day, that developer that's waiting for you might say, hey, you know what? I can actually help you with your number one if you want to go do number two on your list, which is more important to me anyway. That's a really valuable collaboration tool when you're doing that within the Agile process. So the question there, when you're looking at priorities and what you're doing is, going back to this picture, like, shouldn't we just clean the roads before we paint them? That's a pretty obvious idea, right? Same concept goes into how do your priorities align, and are you staying transparent with them? Is your company structured in a way where you guys are getting the roads clean before you paint them? So putting lack of empathy aside as far as the truck driver getting out of the actual car or truck. So enter empathy. I had to laugh at Bridget because I figured, oh, I'm sorry, that slide actually has content on it. That's why I was thrown off, but you can't see it at all. So in this part of in this transition from talking about priorities, the two things I really want to challenge you to all ask yourselves is, are your priorities really transparent? So a lot of times it's not within our own control to set our own priorities. It's just not. Whether it's something that the product needs delivered, or whether it's something that a customer needs right now, it's outside of our control sometimes what our priorities are going to be. But it's in everybody's control to keep your priorities transparent. So I really want to stress and challenge everyone here to think about, are your priorities transparent? And if you can get really good at keeping yours transparent, whether that's just talking with people next to you with what you're working on, in your scrums, at the water cooler, then start to challenge others. Are others' priorities transparent? Do you know what your counterparts in security or QA are working on? Let's use the highway example. If the county workers are all talking while they're having coffee, getting the trucks ready in the morning, Jackie might say, hey, I'm going to go paint the Highway 5 tomorrow, and Frank might say, oh, I'm cleaning roads this week and I don't have any order I need to do it, so I'll go clean Highway 5 today so it's clean for you tomorrow. Like, those are just basic conversations we can have and stay transparent, and it's going to help us all collaborate a lot more effectively. Exactly. Transparency is something that you can't see ever. It's a mystery. Priorities too. You can't see those. So enter this concept of empathy. So priority transparency, I feel, is really core to helping manage this problem. But as Bridget had talked about earlier, you have to have some empathy here. You have to understand things, and half of these were in Bridget's slide too, so that's why I think they're really funny. But Jeff Cessna is getting lots of shout outs today for his blog post on empathy. If you haven't read it, read it. It's awesome. Going back to this picture again and again, because the more I look at it, the more ridiculous I think this is that this actually happened. Stop the truck, right? Like, hey, there's a pile of hay here. I don't clean the road. I'm just going to paint over it. That doesn't make any sense. We don't do that, or we shouldn't do that in our jobs. Hey, I'm going to install this build. It didn't pass the unit test, but we really need to get it to our customers, so fire in the hole. What? No. Come on. We can do better. Let's figure out why. Why didn't it pass the unit test? Can we collaborate and figure out how to solve that more effectively? Yeah, the automation broke. Configuration management, they must be using Chef. It just doesn't work right. Right, guys? No. Just picking on my Chef friends over there. I meant salt, yes. Well, I mean, I suppose there's excuses like, it rained and the hay was heavy, so I couldn't move it. But, like, honestly, this does happen every day, and like this is just such a basic example. Like, be empathetic, you know. So the street wasn't clean. Move the hay. It's not that hard, right? I think that we need to start looking at empathy as a competitive advantage. And the reason I say that is because when you look at whether it's the company size, I think when you look at smaller companies, it's a little easier to build an empathetic organization because there's more of an impact on performance. And as the company gets larger, company size plays a really big role in the importance of empathy and how effective or how optimal your operations, development, security, QA teams can all function. And if you guys are all working together in a way that allows you to both see what you're working on and actually care about it, to Bridget's point, you have to care about it. It takes a lot of pressure. The way I look at it is it takes a lot of pressure off of the organization's responsibility to orchestrate what needs to happen to meet the goal. So I'll try to say that again, maybe in less confusing terms. But the idea is that as you're you're required to meet them, and if you're supposed to deliver awesome service, if that's everybody's goal, you have to be able to orchestrate all of those things that need to happen. Well, if you have teams that can adjust to and help each other and identify what each other are working on and collaborate a lot more effectively, that is clearly a competitive advantage for any company. Any company that's trying to deliver a service is going to deliver that service faster. It's going to be more effective. You're going to be able to adjust and adapt to change more effectively than a company who puts all this pressure on aligning your priorities perfectly. And you know what? That road should have been cleaned before the hay was moved, and so I'm going to incent this other person over here to just paint over the hay because that was ridiculous. We should have just done it right the first time. You don't need to operate that way. The next point I want to talk about that I think we sometimes avoid is human nature. And I had to use Cutler because I'm in Chicago, right? You all love Cutler, right? No? Lukewarm feeling on Cutler. So human nature, motivation and incentives plays an important role here, and I think that this is where empathy really helps kind of bridge the gap a lot. But if you really think about this, what incentive is stronger for a football player? Is it to win a Super Bowl, or is it to land a big contract? It's going to vary by person. Every person has their own motivations, and every person's got a few different things that motivate them. I would argue by watching Cutler play, he was pretty interested in his big contract. Not that I can say much, having Christian Ponder play for us. But the idea here is that there really is a different road that these guys can take, and whether it's trying to build up your team, or whether it's just trying to add the right person to your team. Which person do you want on your team? Do you want the person that's just looking to land the big contract, or are you trying to find the people that win? And I want to circle back to the talk I was talking about earlier with Kaufman and what your job is, because he used a really interesting analogy for this specific concept. So he talks about delivering on your objectives. So let's go back to the soccer player example. You have an offense and you have a defense. If you're incenting your defense to make sure, if nothing else happens, just don't let them score that many goals. Same thing on the offense. If you're incenting your offense, I don't care what happens, score as many goals as possible. That's what I want you to do. That's our winning strategy, right? Well, in that scenario, both your offense and defense have situations. That's really funny because on my computer, these are actually down here. The arrows are pointing to the lose. In both scenarios, your own team is incented to lose. Like, it is actually better for the defense to lose 0-1 than to win 5-4. So do they go to the locker room feeling good about themselves? Another example that Kaufman uses that I think is even better, so it's just talking at a high level about incentives. Has anyone here ever been a waitress or waiter? Do you mind if I just pick on you a little bit? Okay. Did you share tips, or did you keep your own tips?
Share.
Did you like that?
Depending on who you work with.
All right. So she shared tips, and it depended on who she worked with. Anyone in here that didn't share tips? Did you prefer that?
Definitely made my service delivery a little better.
Yeah. How much did you care? How much did you care about other people's tables when you were busy?
Not as much.
How much did you care about other people's tables when you were really busy? See, so this is just such an interesting idea to think about. Where if you're sharing tips, you care a lot more about other people's tables than if you're not sharing tips. Well, in that situation, if you're looking at I want to add talented wait staff, but this can be applied to a technology team. I want to add talented wait staff. People are a lot more interested in working for environment where they get to keep their own tips as opposed to sharing if they're really good, because depending on who you work with, you may have to share those tips with somebody who's not as good. But in that same situation, you could also argue that scenario is also contributed to the mentality that they're just trying to land the big contract, right? They're not trying to win. Their tables are going to be satisfied, but the tables next to them that if there's a good football game on and Matt's your server and he gets distracted because he's watching the Bears beat up on the Packers or something like that. No, Bridget. Nobody loses to the Packers in my slideshows. But you guys get the concept, right? You have to think about the human nature aspect of things. What's your team incented to do around you? What are you guys all doing? And when you start to apply that to, are you empathetic towards each other? Do your priorities align? You start to see how all of this kind of works together and helps you figure out how effectively you can run as an organization to become awesome. I'll have a link to that Kaufman talk too if you're interested. It's a fun link. But overall, the idea here is that I want you all to think about or be mindful of human nature. So I'm not saying that it's an excuse to not be empathetic, but ultimately we are all humans and we all are incented or motivated to do specific things. So when you're trying to collaborate with your resources or the different team members in your organization, think about how their team is set up. Think about what they're being asked to deliver and how that does or doesn't correlate with what you're trying to do, because that thinking about it from their perspective makes a big difference in your ability to collaborate. And the last point I want to talk about is just organizational alignment. I think it matters a lot. And this is probably one of the more difficult ones, which is why I put it at the end, and I don't want to talk about it a ton because we all don't have a ton of control over it. But you look at folks that are working for startups or just smaller companies in general, and I like this example of a Timberwolf trying to make a basket because I don't know that they made any this year. But the idea is that the smaller team has more focus. It's a lot easier to put 5 guys on the floor and say, we want to win this game, we need to shut this person down, let's go do it, right? And that same concept applies to a tech team. Goals can be clearly aligned. There's less folks to align them with. But ultimately, you do have to be careful because you may have individuals that either make an inappropriate decision. So, maybe one of the guys in this example here left a defensive assignment they shouldn't have because they really wanted to get a block shot for their stats. So there are aspects of having that small team that you have to think about managing. But then as the team gets larger, you have other things to think about as well. You start to build on specialized roles. I think football is a really interesting analogy to this in the tech world where in technology we have operations, we have QA, we've got development, we've got product. And in football you've got linemen. Did the linemen in this picture make all their blocking assignments? Did the running back choose the best path? Are the wide receivers downfield blocking? All of those things need to be orchestrated together in order for this play to be successful, or in order for the Vikings to beat, or the Bears to beat the Vikings again and again. Probably one more time if Ponder keeps playing for us. But the idea here is that if you're looking at this picture a different picture, any football player you're looking at, it doesn't always happen exactly how you're looking at it. Maybe the fullback was supposed to block the linebacker. Well, the linebacker wasn't there, so does the fullback just stop what he's doing? No, the idea is we want this running back to go as far as possible, so I'm going to find somebody else to block. And that's the same concept that we should be thinking about. That gets a bit more complicated as the team grows, but the idea is still the same, is you want to identify, my team owns this, right? It'd be great if somebody's able to say, hey, you know what, my team owned that. But guess what? In this scenario, the fullback wasn't there to block, so the wide receiver blocked. Same concept here. Hey, this hay's here, it's not mine to move, but I'm going to move it anyway, right? That team structure matters a lot, but you really have to do what you can as you get larger to identify who owns what areas. Doesn't mean you have to take away the aspect of collaboration or take away, using the whole term of like developers in production, like keys to the kingdom. You don't have to take those things away. You can still collaborate with things, but you should still have ownership. You need to have a sense of ownership and accountability on these things. So the point that I'd like to make sure you guys take away from that is just keep ownership clear regardless of the team size. Whether you're a small team and you need some people to really focus on defense this week, this month, forever, or a large team and you have specific roles that you want to make sure people execute on. So just a quick summary of some of the ideas that I talked about. Priority transparency, I still feel like that's the most important. We have to be aware of the priorities of others, and we have to make sure others can see our priorities. If we don't do that, how do we collaborate successfully? We just can't. Empathy, it's such an obvious one. You have to understand what your coworkers and what your customers need, and you have to be willing to care about that, like Bridget was saying. And human nature, just be aware of it. It's no excuse not to be empathetic, but it is something that we all are human and we all are motivated by specific things. So understanding what organization structures and incentives exist today are important, as well as just organizational awareness. Are you aware of how your structure needs to function in order to win? So what's your role in that? What's your role in your team? What's your role in that organizational structure? And because Matt told me he really wanted people to think about one idea, I think, just added this in real quick, I think what I'd really like you to take into consideration is that aligning and incentivizing an organization, it's not a perfect science. It's constantly changing. It's something that you have to manage. So this isn't a problem you solve for. It's a problem you just have to be prepared to manage forever. It's not going to go away. But the good thing is that everybody has this problem. So it's really more important about, are you managing better than others? That is my talk. Thanks, everybody.
So we missed this the first time around. Questions? Questions for Andy? Got one from Matt over here.
So, in your experience, when you talk about managing priorities, do you find it more effective to manage them up or down?
So what I... Yeah, good call, Ducey, thanks. So the question was, in my experience, do I find it more effective to manage priorities up or down? In an ops team, what I've found the most successful pattern to be so far is not so much establishing an exact order, but staying a little looser on it and doing something like a Kanban board where you try to establish, hey, these are like the 6 things I really care about this week. Because I think there's a lot of value in flexibility to what people are going to execute on. Everybody knows like there's things in your queue right now you're going to go back and you're actually excited to work on, and there are things that you absolutely don't want to touch. And you got to be in the mood to touch those things, right? You can't force somebody to come in at 10 a.m. and check in and say, this thing needs to get done right now, even though you hate doing it, but I don't need it till Friday, right? So what I've found, at least on the ops side of things, what I've found to be most successful is Kanban boards that are set up in a way that allow you to just kind of get a pool of things you know you want to execute on, not really sprint-like, but the idea of, hey, here's a queue of work, kind of work through it the best you can. These are most important to me, but ultimately this is what we want to deliver on. And the nice thing about that, I think a value that I've started to see from that that I didn't really plan on is that makes it super easy for anyone in ops to talk to a developer about what's in their queue for the week, right? So when a developer's like, this dependency for this sprint's killing me, I really need to execute on this, they can look at that board and say, okay, you're working on these 6 things. I can just do that next for you. That's fine. Or I'll try to get to that, but this other thing's got me really busy. And suddenly they have a collaboration chat about, holy cow, the developer could actually help solve that for you in 2 minutes. And you get to move on to the next thing. So did that answer your question? It's kind of rambly, but okay. Any other questions? Yeah.
So
several different sites, and I don't feel like we have
Yeah.
empathy across those sites.
Yeah, that's a good question. So the question was, as SPS grew, how did we maintain empathy? And I think there are a fair number of examples where we didn't. It was really hard. Ultimately, what we ended up doing was we try to align both operations and development resources by a service, so that everybody cares about delivering the same service. So one of the things that I think where we struggled for a while was we got big really fast, and it's been a really successful and fun ride. But as you do that, you start to add all these services to your systems, and they maybe don't all align in the technology footprint, or maybe don't even necessarily align in the type of service they're providing. And so thinking about, do you have engineers right now that care about all of your web services, but also care about your Cassandra cluster? Oh, and they're maintaining your analytics tool. And how does that align with what development's doing? I think that I got some squeaking thing. I think that's an area where organizational alignment, as much as I don't like to use that as an example, is really helpful. Because if you can get everyone aligned on the same services and really care about them, and sometimes it means chopping the team up, right? Hey, you're going to be a team of 2 now, but this is all you're going to care about, and we want you to make it awesome. Not so much siloing their skill sets, but more like, what services are you delivering? So that's a tough one. There's a lot of good reads out there, though, around how to manage empathy and get it instilled into your culture. So any other questions? Awesome. Well, I promise I won't, for those of you who were looking this way, I won't tell you who the security guys were, so you guys are safe. Don't have to worry about it. Great. Thanks for having me, guys. This is awesome.
So we'll be taking about a 15-minute break.